Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 4 in a 20-part series I am doing covering fan-favorite or fan-requested successor chapters in Order of the Legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but it would make me happy. In the grand scheme of all these successor chapters you can pick to be your favorite, you have a lot of choices. You like your noble savior types who go to hell and back just for a few people, just a few random civilians. You have your honor-bound knights who, although are stern and seemingly care little or nothing for that of civilian life, they are genuinely characters written with depth. You have the tactical, you have the overly audacious, and the overly adorned. In kindness there is evil, in evil there is kindness. Then you have balance, and then you have this. And then there's these assholes. The Marines Malevolent are the meanest chapter in the setting. They aren't the most evil, they are just mean. And that's kind of the reason why a lot of people like them. Though they do tend to attract the wackadoo schmackadoo crowd a bit, they are one of the more standout Marine chapters in 40k. And I want to discuss who they are and why they are so well regarded, while being just the absolute worst. To start somewhere, their origins are weird, because they are of an unknown progenitor legion. They allegedly were from a founding in the 32nd millennia, which early estimates could mean that they were in the second founding, which is kind of a big deal, or late estimates could imply that they were in the third, fourth, or another one that happened that era. But regardless, they are an old chapter with a lot of reverence to them. With that in mind, who fits the bill of their Primarch the best? It's Perturabo. It's just, like with most early founding successor chapters, they at least have some resemblance to their forebearer chapters. Even with, say, the Iron Snakes, which are probably one of the most out there second founding chapters of the Ultramarines, they might not seem like Ultramarines at first until you realize their entire shtick is governing a large section of space while playing the part of diplomats. Albeit a bit weirder than normal Ultramarines about it, but you get my point. Dude, these guys fight with peak efficiency, they hate civilians who can't defend themselves, they don't really give a shit about other space marines, their veteran markings for their weapon casings are hazard stripes that the Iron Warriors would use as a joke on their armor and weapons. Alongside that, their chapter is so old that they use Heresy-era equipment, which means that they might be pulling a Death Eagles here and have just been a Black Shield group that somehow snuck into the census. I'm also vaguely familiar with the idea that there is this theory that they are the successors of a Black Shield group that was Death Guard oriented. The name, I believe, was the Marines of Malevolence, and though I get it, I think that's a bit too clean of a line of succession. I know that might not make sense, but I find things are usually not nearly as clean cut in 40k with these unknown progenitors. But I will say it is literally just a gut feeling that they aren't. So use your own head on this. If you think they are Death Guard, they're probably Death Guard. If you think they're Iron Warriors, they're probably Iron Warriors. I would be remiss not to mention that specific factoid on its own, so I just thought I'd throw that in before we got into the video proper. We don't know their homeworld, but it's most likely that they are a fleet-based chapter, as they have a bit of a piratical streak in them that allows them to continue to exist the way they have been, and in order to do that, they need to actually, not be on one place at any given time for too long. See, people hate them. A lot. People hate them a lot. They have been cut off from the majority of channels of getting supplies. They've pissed off the Mechanicus, they've pissed off most Space Marine chapters, and they've pissed off most human factions. So, after being cut off from supplies from the Imperium as a whole, they inevitably ended up resorting to theft and scrapping of old and new tech in order to continue their way of living. So they will find dead Space Marines and steal their weapons and armor if it means they can live to fight again, which is a very interesting way to look at them. They do not have supplies and view humans with contempt, which I think is a fun way of seeing Space Marines, because the balance of humors is kind of an important aspect to each Space Marine chapter. There's levels to each view that they have. There's the kindness, the anger, the sadness, and the hate. It's kind of a very common thing for each Space Marine chapter just to be a different balance of each of these numbers. With them, it's like 100% fuck-ass mad all the time, and that's their shtick. Everything else is like below 20. And I think that kind of plays into their favor. They hate civilians. They aren't there to save people. They are there to kill enemies. It's a very fine distinction to make, but it's not an easy one for some people to stomach. There are times when they served, I believe, in the War for Armageddon, where the level of civilian casualties that they were racking up was a little bit far beyond the idea of being negligible, and it was so far into the red that the Salamanders actually took quite a big deal of problem with that. So there was actually like a lot of issues between the two of them, though we'll touch on that a little more later. They ended up during one of the Wars for Armageddon bombarding refugee camps with whirlwind shells in order to kill an invading orc force that was in the area without any warning to the refugee camp that they were going to do that. Not even so much as one guy shouting, "Take cover." They ended up killing the entire refugee camp, but they ended up gutting the majority of the orc forces. In their minds, that was the most efficient way of accomplishing their goal, which is to eradicate all orcs. And the humans in the camp, who gives a shit, right? Their mentality is kind of summed up in some of their chapter mantras. I think one of the bigger ones that is emblematic of who they are is the phrase, "There is no such thing as innocence, only degrees of guilt." Those civilians in those camps were just as worthy of death as the rest of the orcs that were invading them. So why not take them both out? One was weak and deserving of death, the other is an enemy to the Imperium. In their eyes, both deserved it, so why not? They're accomplishing their goal. Because of this mentality, they're kind of a relic of what people wanted all Space Marines to be back in the 90s and the 80s. Just these hulking, grimdark monsters who were seen as demigods and thought the people beneath them were literally beneath them in all capacities, both mental, physical, spiritual, so on and so forth. They are a violent fist of a group and will hurl themselves at any threat to the Imperium, which I think is the important distinction to make between them and other Renegade chapters. They are 100% loyal to the Imperium, and even though they do all this shit, they are still a set of members in the Imperium. Also, side note, if you are a human being on a planet and you hear the name Captain Vinyar in context of a Space Marine being within 100 kilometers of your current location, you probably should take out a life insurance policy. Yeah, he's not a... On the wiki, they mention that he's known for making quite a few controversial decisions in a chapter that's known for making nothing but controversial decisions. If you ever want to have a good time, feel free to look up what he's done. You know, I haven't thrown out this phrase in a while, but yeah, oops all war crimes is kind of his thing. Yeah. They have a storied existence where they tended to butt heads, like I mentioned, with the Salamanders a lot, because the Salamanders are quintessentially the opposite of them. They are kind, where the Malevolents are harsh. In the stories that involve the two of them, there is this kind of balancing act that has to happen in order for them to kind of continue existing in the same spot, where one will help the other as long as one does something for the other one. It's very interesting. I think it's a fun dichotomy to see these two groups that at least externally have the same goals, but such different ways of accomplishing them. It's very interesting to see the morals of one be questioned by the other and back and forth. It's like a Noble Bright Warhammer 40k fan versus a Grimdark 40k fan. Just stick them in a room, throw a pipe wrench in between the two of them, and come back in an hour. They'll either like make peace and be best friends, or you're gonna come in with one less guy. It's kind of how that works. So with all that lore in mind, I'd also be a bit of a moron if I didn't mention that it was because of them that the Angry Marines were born. The Angry Marines are a bit of a meme. I will cover them at some point in the future. I have no idea when, but they are a bit of a legendary fan chapter of Space Marines. So with all that lore in mind and all the excerpts I've mentioned to you, what is it that draws people into liking the Marines Malevolent? I think it's complicated, but I think in as simple a term as possible, they have a lot of unique traits that make them stick out in comparison to other Space Marine chapters. They are completely unbending. they will stick to what they believe is the right way to prosecute a war, even if it means censure from the Inquisition. And as long as they get the job done, what's the point, right? They are outcasts. They are renegades in all but name and duty. The only reason the Marines Malevolent are not branded a traitor faction is because they do their job so well that the Inquisition cannot afford to clip them away from the Imperium. Though, I would also say it's likely because if you had them as an enemy, man, that would suck so much. Like, for real, they have an overwhelming civilian casualty rate when they're working for you. If they were actively trying to kill civilians, could you imagine the numbers they would crank out? My god. The appeal to them is they are an outlier of cruelty. They are dangerously violent. They remind me of the Knights of Blood, a group of berserk blood angels that gave up the ability to be a part of the Imperium in order to prosecute their bloody rampage-style war, no matter the civilian cost in lives. Personally, I have mixed feelings on them. There's a lot of nuance to how I feel about them. I tend towards more of the middle of the spectrum in between the Noble Brights sections of 40k to the Grimdark sections of 40k. So because of that, I tend to have issues with factions on the extremes of either end. But I do think on the positive end of things, there is a capacity for this specific chapter of Space Marines to tell really good stories. Their aesthetic is really neat, and I think that as a gimmick, they are pretty fun. But I do think it's also an issue with them that they seem to be relegated to this odd category of what I refer to as untouchables. Like, there are a few Marine chapters that won't ever get stories from their perspective or anything longer than like a short story, because it's just such a convoluted and complicated way of looking at a specific chapter. Like the Red Scorpions, even though I guess you could count the Badab War and like the Imperial Armory books as something, but anything that was involved in the Pentarchy of Blood, all of those are just chapters that either have not enough to add anything interesting onto, or they have too much of a hyper-specific slant that writing stories for them would be kind of hard. So they're in this category where GW just doesn't seem to want to touch them. And I think the Marines Malevolent are like that. I know there's like a few stories out there about them, but nothing to the extent of other chapters that have significantly less writing than them. Like, I shit you not, prior to Aaron Dembski Bowden making Spears of the Emperor or what have you, the Mentor Legion, the one guy from the Mentor Legion that was in that book had not nearly as much lore on them as they did there, and it just took one character to be included in a full-length novel. So I think that is kind of a negative thing, but again, I have criticisms on both sides of the spectrum. So what do you think about the Marines Malevolent? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you have mixed feelings on them like I do? Let me know in the comments what you think. Alongside that, I want to send a special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. And if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and till next time. Now, I don't know why there are two Space Marine chapters with photo-reversed color schemes. They also both have a resounding theory that they are somehow related to Perturabo, but they have nothing to do with each other. It's weird. I don't get it, but I love the scythes, though. They're pretty cool. I think they're neat.